Greetings dear viewers, this is George from Ireland, and in this video I'm going to be saying why the British Army ought to be allowed to recruit at schools in Derry. Just recently a local council, I think it was Derry City Council, voted that the British Army should not be allowed to go into schools there to seek to recruit people into the UK Armed Forces. Of course, one can't actually enlist in the British military at the age of 17, only then with parental permission. The age of 18, one can do it without parental permission. And 18 is the age recognised by international law when one really can be a member of an armed force and fight and all the rest of that. So those who are under 18, when they're 17, they can do various military duties but never be sent to a combat zone. The SDLP abstained on this issue, which is about the best that could be hoped for. So why did Sinn Féin vote against this? And indeed Donnelly, he's an independent Republican. Let's be frank, Donnelly is an advocate for the real IRA. Well, they're obviously deeply anti-British, certainly Donnelly is, maybe not Sinn Féin anymore, despite being British themselves, don't recognise that the United Kingdom is, it rightfully includes Northern Ireland, and that Irish people, that we are ethnically, culturally British, all the rest of it. Anyway, Donnelly said that the British Army had an appalling record in Ireland, and I wish to take issue with that. It has an exemplary record, which is not to say that there was no wrongdoing whatsoever. So the British Army did not start the Troubles. That was the UVF, you could say, in 1966, some loyalist terrorists in 1969. Perhaps I'm having to rake over old history. The IRA had obviously been looking for an opportunity to start the conflict again because they failed in the late 50s and early 60s. So the British Army was brought onto the streets in Northern Ireland in 1969, everyone knows, to defend the Catholic community from loyalist terrorists. So until the 70s, it was not controversial for Catholics in Northern Ireland to volunteer for the British Armed Forces. I remember it always was volunteering, never conscription. Even those of nationalist views would not look askance at joining the British Armed Forces. We know there was a conflict from 1969 to about 98. And yes, occasionally soldiers behave badly, some of them terribly. So people had numberless encounters with the British Armed Forces being stopped at roadblocks and so on, and most of the cases there was no friction. But occasionally soldiers would be rude, would verbally abuse people, spat on people. I was spat on myself in the Falls Road by two British soldiers. People who were suspected of being the IRA or NLA were sometimes beaten up. Probably all know about 1972, those 5 men who were abused with the 5 techniques, and the Republic of Ireland, we won a case against the UK at the European Court of Human Rights, which ruled that these men had been abused, specifically ruled they had not been tortured. Well, in Derry, perhaps the most salient event was January 1972, when 14 civilians were shot dead by the parachute regiment. So I acknowledge all that, but in the context of a conflict where 3,500 people were killed, the British Army's behaviour overall was very good indeed, because they would say, we know who the IRA and INLA are, we know where they live, we could go kill them any day, they've got no compunction about killing us whilst unarmed, they've got no compunction about abducting and torturing to death people they accuse of being civilians. The IRA's got no qualms about kidnapping people's children, threatening to kill them if such a man doesn't drive a bomb into a checkpoint or something like that. So the British Army's ethical and legal standards were much, much higher than that of the IRA and INLA. I don't have a single instance when the British Army killed someone they'd taken prisoner. So people tend to focus on the few disgraceful incidents and overlook the incidents where the British Army conducted itself honourably, which is just far less eye-catching but much more frequent. So this is an unfortunate point to make, but in conflict, civilians necessarily get killed. Can anyone tell me any armed conflict ever when no civilians were killed at all? It would be better if we didn't have conflicts. And even if we had them, it would be better if civilians did not get killed. So an army must strive to avoid civilian casualties. No army can ever guarantee they won't kill civilians by accident. If there's collateral damage, if there's a building they're going to attack, there are enemy fighters in there, but there are also civilians. Some of the civilians are going to get killed by accident. But an army should, of course, take steps to try and minimise this. If one minimises it too much, one is obviously advantaging the other side, and that might make the conflict last longer, or indeed allow the other side to win. People were able to go about their daily business during the Troubles, and the army did not prevent that. What else can I say? There's often footage of people verbally abusing soldiers to their faces, and they did this with impunity because they knew that the soldiers were not going to hurt them. There was nothing to be afraid of. That was that. So there are all sorts to join the British Army, and all sorts of personality types. Some of them angelic, most of them a bit of a mixture, and some of them bad. Some of them being juvenile delinquents, and the army was a way for them to go straight, to avoid their brushes with the law. So I don't have a prejudice in favour of British soldiers. I realise that a few of them will behave dreadfully. And like in any army, there are people who are bullies who want to be extra macho, throw their weight around. And of course, that's distasteful. It definitely happens, this unpleasant behaviour. So the army strove to use less than lethal force in riot situations, to use batons and not to shoot people. There was that 1972 exception. Now, as the world scale of massacres go, that was small fry. Now, for someone whose relative has been killed, that person's irreplaceable. Yes, it's true. But if we look at this in context, that was not a large number of people killed. And of course, it shouldn't have happened. And murder charges ought to have been preferred against the soldiers who unlawfully killed people on that day. So people throwing stones were not fired at with bullets, except on that occasion. Stones can and do kill, by the way, and I've seen footage of soldiers being knocked out, well, a soldier being knocked out by a stone, and his comrades are not firing back. Well, on to the present day. The complaints are that the British Army is targeting the working class. Well, most people are working class, if the proletariat is properly defined. It would be a curious situation if Sinn Féin wanted to deny working class people jobs. Would it be acceptable if they only targeted the bourgeoisie? People learn all sorts of skills in the army, but yes, learning to kill is one of those things. And by the way, I would have no objection to the Irish Army recruiting in Northern Ireland. I think the British Army would be good if they could recruit in the Republic of Ireland, though I don't see that happening anytime soon. And some of the Sinn Féiners who are objecting to the UK Army recruiting in Derry said, oh, they go for the Unionist community and that's bad. So why don't you let them go for the Nationalist community as well? Everyone. I'm not sure to what extent it's up to the local council or the individual school. Youths who do some military training are going to have a positive outlet for their energies and will instill them with self-respect and would have a way to avoid getting into juvenile delinquency, crime or terrorism, anything like that. What else? Donnelly said that the United Kingdom has been involved in a number of disastrous and illegal wars. Well, are all wars disasters? People obviously get killed in wars. Perhaps by definition that makes it a disaster. In recent years, don't have time to go into all of them, but the UK has emerged victorious. Saddam Hussein is not there. It has been proven that there are now no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, or Gaddafi is not there and he was not able to massacre civilians in Libya, and there was a UN Security Council authorizing that military action. I could go on. UN authorization for the liberation of Afghanistan from a vicious and medieval theocracy. Or about Iraq, it was also to do with UN Security Council resolutions. There had been one in February that year. The March one didn't pass. Anyway, I digress. I dispute that these wars are illegal, and I don't know of a single court in the world which has ever ruled them to be illegal. By the way, bombing Gaddafi's forces in Libya was a European Union policy. So Sinn Féin are ardent Remainers. They want Northern Ireland to somehow remain in the UK. Remain in the EU. The Irish Republic to remain in the EU. That was a European Union policy. If we support the EU, we have to support that policy. It wasn't just the United Nations, it wasn't just NATO countries, it was EU as a whole, even though Irish jets didn't actually do any of the bombing. I am against this ban for several reasons, partly because it's a travesty on the record of the British Army in Ireland, and there have been Irish people in the British Army for centuries. It was our army for a long time, and it's obviously denying fulfilling and remunerative careers to young people. It can be educational and so on. And it's not as though it's pacifists who are proposing this. Mr. Donnelly is perhaps the foremost opponent of this, and he would have us go back to the conflict that killed people. His bloodlust is endless. Even if tens of thousands of people would be killed, he would be happy with that, despite the fact that partition is incredibly popular in Ireland. 85% of people voted for the Good Friday Agreement, a partitionist agreement. Those who voted against were almost all unionists.